The galaxy was old, and most of its civilizations were older still. Empires had risen, shined bright like suns, and then collapsed into silence. Yet the Illyrian Empire, once proud and radiant, now found itself at the edge of ruin. Its palaces were still tall, its banners still flew across shining cities, but the foundations of its power were cracked. The Illyrians had long been known as dreamers, artists, and scholars. Their ships glided through space like flowing rivers of silver. Beautiful but fragile, they valued peace and refinement, preferring discussion over war, treaties over bloodshed. For centuries their world was safe because stronger neighbors fought their battles for them, or because their wealth bought security. But times had changed. Now the Illyrians stood on the edge of collapse. Their enemies, the ruthless Quran raiders, gathered fleets in the dark. Their harvests failed after strange plagues touched their soil. Their once mighty alliances had crumbled, for no one wished to spend lives and resources to protect a weakened people. The High Council of Illyria met in the Crystal Chamber, a hall built with walls that shimmered like frozen rain. Tall windows showed the dim stars outside. The counselors wore robes of deep blue and silver, but their eyes were heavy with worry. "We can no longer stand alone," said Counselor Maravin, his voice quiet but firm. "The Coran fleets circle us like wolves, already border colonies. Fall. Our armies are ceremonial. They are trained to march, not to fight. If no one aids us, Illyria will vanish." Silence followed. Every counselor knew it was true. Their navy was a shadow of what it had been. Their fleets, designed more for elegance than war, could not match the brutal iron of the Coran ships. "We must send a plea," another said at last. "We must call for aid across the stars." The chamber filled with low murmurs. Some nodded eagerly. Others shook their heads in despair. To send such a plea was to admit weakness before the galaxy. But what choice did they have? Finally, the High Chancellor, an elderly Illyrian named Saralen, rose from her seat. Her hair, white as starlight, framed a face lined with age and wisdom. "If we are too proud to ask for help, then we will not survive," she said. "Let it be known to all. The Illyrian Empire calls for aid. Let any who can come to our defense." Thus the plea was made. From the heart of Illyria, a beacon was built. Engineers worked day and night to craft a transmission that could cross the void. It carried not only words but also images of their suffering. Burned fields, ruined colonies, desperate faces. The message was wrapped with honor and humility, declaring that Illyria would welcome any who answered. The beacon was launched into the cosmic sea, its light streaming across systems and sectors, across the cold dark where few ships ever traveled. The Illyrians waited, breath held, for an answer. They hoped for allies from the core, perhaps the Auralis scholars, wise in strategy and science, perhaps the healers of Veyron, who had the knowledge to cure their soil, or even the warriors of Zathra, famed for discipline and loyalty. They imagined fleets of silver, filled with noble allies descending upon Illyria to save them. For weeks, they waited. On the palace steps, priests prayed to the stars. Farmers in the villages whispered to each other that salvation would come. Children pointed at the skies, waiting for the first ships to appear. But far away, on the edge of a different spiral arm, something unexpected happened. On a small, overlooked planet of blue oceans and green continents, a group of listening stations captured the Illyrian transmission. The planet was Earth. At first, the scientists thought it was a trick or static. The galaxy was vast, but to hear a real distress call from another world seemed impossible. The words were not even in human language, yet the structure was clear. A cry for help. With effort, the transmission was decoded. Images showed ruined cities, starships falling from the sky, people weeping. The news spread quickly through Earth's networks. Governments debated in secret. Should they respond? Could they? For centuries, humanity had struggled not against aliens but against their own planet. Earth was a death world, a place where survival was never easy. Volcanoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, and endless diseases had forged humans into tough survivors. History was written in wars and resilience. Though scarred, humanity had learned to adapt, to rebuild, and to fight for existence. Now, for the first time, another species was asking for their help. On Illyria, weeks turned into months. At first, the council believed no one had heard them. The beacon must have been lost or ignored. Despair grew heavy. Then one night, as the twin moons rose, a watchman on the Illyrian orbital ring saw strange signals on his instruments. Ships were approaching. The council was called at once. The nobles rushed to the windows, eyes shining with hope. "They have come," whispered one elder, clutching his robe. "Our allies have answered." Preparations began at once. Great halls were decorated with banners of welcome. Musicians tuned their instruments. A feast was prepared to honor the saviors who would soon arrive. The Illyrians imagined tall, graceful warriors stepping from shining ships. They imagined noble scholars with kind voices, but as the first shadows fell across the skies, they realized their mistake. The ships were not the polished silver vessels of the core races. These ships were dark, scarred, and patched. Some looked as if they had been rebuilt 100 times. Engines roared like storms as the fleet descended. The very air trembled under their power. The Illyrians stared in confusion. Who were these strangers? Why did their ships look like beasts of war instead of angels of peace? On the landing fields, the first ramps opened, and out stepped the humans. They were not what the Illyrians expected. Their armor was worn, some dented, some mismatched. Their boots were heavy, leaving marks on the smooth crystal floor. Their faces were sun-browned, eyes sharp, movements confident. Some carried tools, others weapons that looked crude but deadly. At first, silence filled the air. The Illyrian nobles, dressed in robes of silk, looked upon these rugged strangers with shock. Were these the ones who answered the call? The High Chancellor stepped forward, her voice steady despite her unease. "Welcome, allies. From what world do you come?" The human leader, a tall figure with lines of age and scars across his jaw, looked at her and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "We come from Earth." The word meant nothing to the Illyrians then, but soon it would mean everything, because the plea that had been cast into the stars had not brought them gentle saviors. It had brought them Deathworlders, humans from a planet that had never given them anything freely, humans who had learned to fight for every breath, humans who carried survival in their bones. And though the Illyrians did not yet understand it, these strangers were exactly what they needed. The great plazas of Illyria were filled with color that day. Long banners of silver and blue stretched from tower to tower. Music drifted through the air, soft strings and crystal chimes. Nobles in shining robes waited with smiles fixed upon their faces. They were ready to welcome heroes of legend, allies from the core, perhaps the noble Oralis or the strong Zathra. Children stood with flower garlands, eager to place them upon the Savior's shoulders. Priests prepared blessings. Farmers from the nearby provinces gathered, their rough hands clasped as they whispered prayers of gratitude. All of Illyria had been told. Salvation had arrived. Then the sky shook. The first ship entered orbit, its shadow streaking across the city. Instead of gleaming silver, the vessel was blackened with burns and patched plates. It looked less like a ship of glory and more like a survivor of endless battles. Behind it came others, 20, then 30, each scarred in its own way. Some bore strange markings, crude flags painted across their hulls. Others had uneven armor that spoke of desperate repairs. The Illyrians stared, their music faltering. This was not what they expected. When the ships descended, the ground trembled. Their engines did not sing like silver harps but roared like storms. Dust swirled across the plaza. Nobles covered their faces with jeweled sleeves. The children clung to their mothers. At last, the first ramp opened. Out stepped the humans. They came not in perfect formation but in steady groups, their boots striking heavy against the crystal floor. Their armor was mixed, some wearing metal plates, others simple fabric reinforced with strange material. Many carried weapons that looked crude but dangerous. Some bore scars upon their faces and hands, marks of a hard life. The Illyrians gasped. They had imagined angels of light. Instead, they saw rough warriors with tired eyes and calloused skin. High Chancellor Siralin stepped forward, her robes flowing, her face calm though her heart raced. "Welcome, honored allies," she said. "We are grateful that you have answered our call. May we know the name of your people?" The human leader stepped down the ramp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair touched by gray and a scar across his jaw. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. He spoke with a deep voice, each word firm. "We come from Earth." The word echoed across the plaza. Most Illyrians had never heard of this world. Some nobles exchanged puzzled glances. A few whispered to each other, asking if Earth was perhaps a forgotten colony. Siralin inclined her head with dignity. "Earth, we welcome you." But behind her, whispers grew. Some nobles frowned at the sight of humans. They looked too harsh, too wild. These were not the graceful allies they had hoped for. Still, the Illyrians led them into the great hall. The music resumed, though weaker than before. Servants carried trays of sweet fruit and wine. The humans accepted little, drinking only water and eating simple bread they carried themselves. The nobles began to speak. Counselor Maravin, who had urged for help, forced a smile. "Tell us, people of Earth, what fleets have you brought? What grand armies stand behind you?" The human leader's answer was simple. "What you see is what we have brought." Maravin blinked. "Only these?" The human's voice remained calm. "These are enough." The hall grew tense. The Illyrians had expected vast fleets. 30 ships seemed too few, too small, too scarred. Could such ragged warriors stand against the Coran hordes? Some nobles began to murmur openly. "Savages," one whispered. "They come dressed as fighters, not as allies. Can they even understand strategy?" But while the nobles doubted, the common folk outside were watching closely. Farmers and craftsmen saw how the humans carried themselves, strong, steady, without fear. They noticed the scars, not as ugliness but as proof of survival, and survival was what Illyria needed most. The humans asked no time for feasts or parades. Within hours of arrival, they began moving through the city. Engineers inspected broken machines, repairing with strange tools. Soldiers walked the walls, studying defenses. Medics carried heavy packs, tending to the sick without hesitation. Where Illyrian nobles hesitated to dirty their hands, humans labored without complaint. On the second day, children followed the humans through the streets, watching them with wide eyes. One soldier, a woman with cropped hair and a warm smile, knelt to show them how to hold sticks like spears. She laughed as the children imitated her stances. For the first time in months, Illyrian children laughed in return. But in the council chamber, unease grew. "These humans are crude," said Counselor Thalen, his voice sharp. "They lack discipline, they lack numbers. We invited allies, not barbarians." Another agreed. "Look at their ships. They are patched together, not crafted with skill. Their weapons look like relics. How can they defend us against the Coran?" Only Siralin remained thoughtful. She had seen the way humans moved, the way they measured every stone, every wall, every face. They were not careless. They were survivors. One evening, she visited their camp outside the palace. There she found the human leader speaking with his officers. They were not seated in golden chairs but on crates and stones. A simple map spread before them. Their voices were low but serious. "You have studied our defenses already?" Siralin asked. The human leader nodded. "Your walls are high but too thin. Your gates are wide but weak. Your soldiers are brave, but they do not know how to fight when the enemy breaks through. We will train them." Siralin tilted her head. "So you believe you can help us?" The human's gaze was steady. "We do not believe. We know." For the first time, Siralin felt a spark of hope. These humans were not what Illyria had expected, but perhaps they were exactly what Illyria needed. The days that followed were filled with change. Humans drilled Illyrian soldiers, teaching them to fight not in parades but in survival. They showed them how to use terrain, how to set traps, how to fight when outnumbered. At first, the Illyrians struggled. They complained of the harsh training, the long marches, the heavy weapons. But the humans pushed them gently but firmly. "The enemy will not spare you," they said. "Learn now or fall later." Slowly, the Illyrians began to change. Muscles grew stronger, hands steadier, eyes sharper. For the first time in centuries, they were learning how to survive rather than simply how to look proud. Outside the palace, the people began to whisper differently. "These humans are strange," said a farmer, "but they fix what no one else could." "They work as hard as we do," said a craftsman, "and they do not look down on us." And among the children, stories began to spread. They told each other how the humans could lift great stones, how they could run without rest, how they laughed even in storms. In their innocence, the children saw not monsters but heroes. Still, the nobles resisted. They gathered in secret chambers, their voices sharp with fear. "We cannot trust them," they said. "They are too fierce. If they defeat the Koran, what then? Will they not turn on us?" But while they argued, the skies above Illyria darkened. Scouts brought word. The Koran fleets had gathered. Their ships, vast and brutal, were moving toward Illyrian space. The humans prepared calmly. They reinforced walls, set hidden traps, and taught the Illyrians how to fight in small groups, not just as a single mass. When asked why they worked so hard, one soldier shrugged. "On Earth," he said, "we learned long ago, no one else will save us. We save ourselves. Now we will save you too." The Illyrians, who had thought survival was only for the desperate, began to see a new truth. The plea they had sent across the stars had not brought them scholars or healers or angels. It had brought them Deathworlders. And though strange, though rough, these humans carried something Illyria had forgotten: strength born from hardship, courage born from pain, hope born from survival. The nobles still doubted, but the people, the farmers, the craftsmen, the children, they began to believe. And when the Koran fleet finally appeared on the horizon of the stars, it was not the Illyrian banners the people watched for courage. It was the sight of scarred human ships rising once more into the sky. The days in Illyria grew restless. The people watched with awe as the humans worked across their cities and fields. Yet inside the shining halls of the Illyrian council, unease deepened. The nobles had always seen themselves as a people of grace. Their traditions were ancient, their voices soft, their manners refined. To them, war was something distant, handled long ago by allies they paid or persuaded. Now they had to share their world with rough strangers who laughed too loud, sweated openly, and spoke directly without ceremony. "They are crude," Councillor Thalen said one evening as the council gathered. "Did you see how they eat? With their hands and their laughter. It shakes the halls as if they were tavern keepers, not warriors. Can such people truly protect us?" Another councillor nodded. "They fix machines, yes, but like common workers. They speak with farmers as if they are equals. Already our people admire them too much. If we allow this to continue, our own dignity will be forgotten." High Chancellor Saralan listened in silence. She had seen the doubts in her peers, but she had also walked among the common people. There she had seen hope returning, not because of the council, but because of the humans. For outside the palace walls, life was changing. In the villages, human engineers repaired broken plows and irrigation pumps. They taught Illyrian farmers how to mend their own tools, showing them tricks with rope and metal. They did not demand payment, only shared food and water. Farmers who once looked to the palace for aid now looked to the strangers. Children followed, human soldiers watching their drills with fascination. The humans trained not with elegance but with energy. They ran until their lungs burned, lifted weights of stone, sparred with wooden sticks until sweat covered their bodies. To Illyrian eyes, it seemed wild, even foolish. Yet the children imitated eagerly, turning sticks into swords and shouting, with laughter. One afternoon, a group of Illyrian guards watched humans climb a broken wall outside the city. The humans moved with speed, using their arms and legs like predators. "This is no proper training," one guard muttered. "It is chaos." But when the wall was rebuilt within the hour, the guards were left silent. The clash between cultures grew sharper each day. The nobles whispered that the humans were too violent, too simple. But the common people whispered something else. That maybe these strangers understood survival better than their own lords. One evening, Sarah Len invited the human leader to dine in the Crystal Hall. She wished to learn more. The meal was grand, bowls of fruit that shimmered with soft light, roasted grains seasoned with delicate spices, cups of golden wine. The humans, however, ate little. They seemed uncomfortable in the shining room, there, hands resting near their belts as if expecting danger. "You do not enjoy our food?" Sarah Len asked gently. The human leader smiled faintly. "It is fine, but we are used to meals that are simpler. On Earth, survival does not wait for feasts. We eat what we can, when we can." A murmur passed among the council. To them, the words sounded uncivilized, but Sarah Len saw something else. Discipline, even humility. "And what of your world?" she asked. "Tell us of Earth." The hall grew quiet. Everyone leaned closer, curious. The human's voice grew steady, almost hard. "Earth is not a gentle world. Storms can destroy cities in a night. The ground shakes. Mountains burn, seas rise. And even when nature is calm, people are not. Our history is filled with wars. We fought each other for land, for food, for survival. It was never easy. But because of that, we learned to endure. We learned to stand when others fall." The counselors shifted uncomfortably. To them this sounded barbaric. But Sarah Len felt a strange truth in those words. "Then it is true," said Thalen bitterly. "You are a people of war. You bring your violence here. What happens when there is no enemy left? Will you not turn your strength against us?" The human leader met his gaze calmly. "We did not come to conquer. We came because you asked for help, and because we know what it means to cry for aid and receive none." Words silenced the room. For a moment, even Thalen had no answer. Outside the council chambers, proof of human intent grew clearer each day. In the sick halls, human medics worked without rest. They carried heavy packs filled with herbs, powders, and strange tools. Illyrian, doctors trained to work slowly with ritual, watched as humans treated wounds with speed and skill. Infection that Illyrians thought hopeless was cleaned, bound, and healed within days. In the fields, human engineers built strange devices from scraps. A broken water pump was turned into a working system with nothing more than rope, iron nails, and determination. Farmers wept with relief, for their crops no longer withered. And in the training grounds, Illyrian soldiers were being transformed. The humans showed them new ways of fighting, not the elegant lines of parade marches, but the quick, flexible movements of real battle. They taught them how to move silently at night, how to strike from shadows, how to use the land itself as a weapon. At first, the Illyrians resisted. They stumbled, grew tired, and complained. But the humans never mocked. They only pushed gently forward. "Again," they would say, "you can do more than you think." Slowly, the Illyrians began to believe. Their legs grew stronger. Their hands grew firm. Their hearts grew steady. For the first time in centuries, Illyria was learning not only how to live, but how to fight to live. Yet the nobles remained troubled. "They are changing us," one whispered in the council. "Our soldiers march like humans, our farmers repair like humans, even our children play like humans. Soon we will not be Illyrians at all." Another answered, "Perhaps change is what keeps us alive." The debate grew fierce. Some feared losing their traditions, others feared losing their world. Meanwhile, the common people had already chosen. They brought food to the humans, gifts of cloth and wood. They greeted them warmly in the streets. To many, the humans were not intruders. They were saviors. And still, the skies grew darker. Scouts reported that the Coran fleet was moving. Thousands of warships gathered, preparing to strike. In the human camps, there was no panic. They prepared, steadily, repairing weapons, drilling soldiers, setting hidden defenses across the land. One evening, a young Illyrian soldier asked a human trainer, "Why do you laugh, even when war is so near?" The human smiled. "Because fear will not save us, but courage might." The boy never forgot those words. The clash of cultures was not yet settled. Illyria's nobles still doubted. But the people had begun to see the truth. The humans were not angels of light. They were not scholars of the core. They were scarred, rough and unrefined, but they were also something Illyria had forgotten how to be. They were survivors. And as the Coran fleet drew closer, it was survival, not elegance, that would decide the fate of Illyria. The skies above Illyria turned dark. Stars that once looked calm now burned with the glow of incoming warships. The Coran fleet had arrived. Their ships were vast, shaped like jagged blades, with red light pouring from their engines. They came, in waves, a storm of iron and fire. From the palace towers, the Illyrians watched with pale faces. Fear spread like cold wind. Priests whispered prayers. Farmers clutched their children. Even soldiers trembled as alarms rang across the city. Inside, the council chamber panic grew. "They are too many," cried Councillor Thalen. "We cannot stand against this, not even with the humans." But High Chancellor Saralin kept her voice steady. "If we retreat now, Illyria will be ashes before sunrise. We must trust the ones who answered our call." Her eyes turned to the human leader who stood calmly in the chamber. He had studied the maps for weeks. He had walked every wall, every gate, every field. Now, as the enemy approached, his voice was firm. "They think they will crush you with numbers. But numbers are not everything. We will not meet them in open ground. We will fight them as Deathworlders fight, where they are weak, not where they are strong." The Illyrians listened in silence. His words carried no poetry, no decoration, but there was something heavier than gold behind them: certainty. The first assault came at dawn. Coran warships rained fire from the skies, striking the outer colonies. Fields burst into flame, towers shattered, and roads crumbled. The Illyrian army, trained for ceremony, broke formation. Many ran, their shields falling from their hands. But the humans did not panic. They moved fast, setting traps they had prepared in secret. Roads were rigged with explosives, collapsing under the feet of advancing machines. Small teams struck from shadows, vanishing before the enemy could strike back. Illyrian soldiers, once paralyzed by fear, now found themselves pulled into the rhythm of human tactics. They learned to fight in smaller groups, to strike and retreat, to use the land as a shield. In one village, a group of Coran raiders marched proudly, expecting no resistance. Suddenly, walls of stone collapsed on them, triggered by ropes and wedges set by human hands. From the smoke, Illyrian farmers armed with simple spears rushed forward, guided by human trainers at their side. For the first time, common villagers defeated armored raiders. The news spread quickly. The Coran were not invincible. On the second day, the Coran pushed toward the capital. Their fleet sent heavy tanks rolling across the plains. The Illyrians had never faced such machines. Their crystal weapons shattered against the thick armor. Soldiers cried out in despair. But the humans saw opportunity. "We don't fight the armor," one officer said. "We fight the gaps." Teams of humans and Illyrians moved through forests and trenches. They set traps in the soil, forcing tanks to stall. Others climbed onto the machines, throwing fire into weak vents. Illyrian soldiers, once terrified, now followed with courage. They learned from the humans' example. If survival demanded boldness, then bold they would be. The battlefield turned chaotic. Smoke filled the air. Fires raged in the distance. Yet through it all, the humans fought with unbroken will. One Illyrian soldier, barely trained weeks before, saw a human captain stand in the open to rally his men. "Hold the line!" the captain shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of battle. And the Illyrians, hearts trembling, held. By the third day, the Quran grew frustrated. Their numbers were vast, but every step forward cost them dearly. They were used to crushing weaker worlds with brute force, but this time the enemy refused to break. The Illyrian Council watched the reports in disbelief. Villages that should have fallen stood firm. Outposts that should have burned held their ground. And at every turn, the mark of human strategy was clear. Still, some nobles whispered doubt. This cannot last. The humans will be broken eventually. No one can fight forever. But Saralan shook her head. You do not understand. For them, survival itself is forever. On the fourth day, the battle reached the capital itself. The Quran unleashed their largest fleet, surrounding the skies with fire. The city shook under bombardment. The Illyrian army, though braver now, began to falter under the sheer weight of the attack. Panic returned to the streets. Families fled into tunnels. Counselors argued in fear. But the humans stood firm. The human leader climbed the walls, his voice carrying above the chaos. They think you are weak. Show them you are not. This is your home. If you fight, you live. If you surrender, you die. Stand. Something broke inside the Illyrians then. Broke and reformed. For the first time, they did not look to the core races for rescue. They looked to themselves, and beside them, scarred humans stood like stone. The final clash began. The Quran charged with overwhelming force. Their soldiers poured through broken gates, roaring in victory. They expected to see Illyrians fleeing. Instead, they met barricades built from stone and wood, defended by farmers, workers, and children alongside soldiers. Hidden traps tore through their ranks. Arrows and spears rained from rooftops. Humans led Illyrians in tight formations, striking, hard and retreating, striking again, never giving the enemy peace. One by one, the Quran's confidence cracked. They were used to weak prey, not prey that bit back. At the heart of the city, the human leader stood with Saralan herself. Together they directed defenses, sending teams where the need was greatest. Saralan, once a leader of words, now found herself raising a sword. By nightfall, the Quran began to withdraw. They had lost too many, too quickly. Smoke hung over the city, but Illyria still stood. The aftermath was heavy with silence. Streets were filled with rubble, yet also with survivors. Families embraced. Children sang songs of courage. Soldiers, once ceremonial, now walked with pride. The Illyrians looked at the humans differently that night. No longer as strangers. No longer as savages. But as the shield that had stood between them and death. The nobles could no longer deny the truth. Their polished traditions had failed. Their golden fleets had been useless. What saved them were the rough hands of Deathworlders, and the courage those strangers had taught them to find in themselves. Saralan stood before her people, her voice strong. We asked for aid, and the stars sent us not angels, but survivors. Let it be known, Illyria still lives because Earth stood with us. And across the city, voices rose in answer. For the first time in memory, Illyria cheered not for themselves, but for their unlikely allies. But as the fires burned low and the wounded were tended, one truth remained. The war was not yet over. The Quran would return. And next time, the fight would be harder still. Yet the Illyrians no longer trembled, because they knew they were not alone. The fires of battle slowly faded. Smoke rose over the crystal towers of Illyria, turning their shining walls gray. The streets were scarred with rubble, the fields scorched by flames. Yet, against all odds, the city still stood. The Illyrians had survived. But survival carried a cost. The wounded filled the plazas where humans and Illyrians worked side by side to bind wounds, share water, and carry the broken to safety. Medics moved without rest. Farmers who once knew only soil now used their hands to build shelters for the displaced. The laughter of children returned, though softer, mixed with the memory of fear. And in the quiet corners, grief settled. Names were whispered of those who had not returned. Illyrian nobles, Soldiers and common folk alike mourned their fallen. The humans too mourned their dead, burying them not in grand tombs, but in simple graves marked with stone. The Illyrians watched, this with curiosity. No grand statues, no songs of glory, just silence, respect, and a promise never to forget. In the council chamber, the nobles gathered once more. Their faces were pale, their robes torn, their voices heavy. Councillor Thalen, who had once doubted, most spoke first. "We live today because of them," he admitted quietly. "If not for Earth, Illyria would already be ashes." Another noble sighed. "We looked for silver fleets and noble allies. Instead, the stars sent us Deathworlders, and they were exactly what we needed." High Chancellor Saralin nodded. She had walked the ruined streets, spoken to the survivors, and stood beside the human leader during the battle. She knew what the people now felt. "They came not for glory," she said, "nor for treasure. They came because we asked, and when we faltered, they stood. When we feared, they endured. That is what saved us." But even as the council admitted this truth, worry lingered. "The Koran will return," Thalen warned. "Their pride will not accept defeat. This battle is only the beginning." The chamber grew heavy with silence. Illyria had survived, but the storm had not yet passed. Outside the palace, the people of Illyria treated the humans no longer as strangers, but as family. Farmers brought them food, children followed them with songs, and workers offered to help repair their ships. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was trust. One young Illyrian soldier told his companions, "They showed us how to stand when we thought we could not. They gave us back our courage. I will never forget." Stories spread quickly. Of the human captain who stood in the open to rally his men. Of the medic who saved a village child by carrying him for miles through fire and smoke. Of the engineers who turned scraps of metal into weapons that held back tanks. The Illyrians told these stories as if they were myths, yet they were real. The children in particular adored the humans. They mimicked their drills, laughed at their strange songs, and even wore makeshift armor of wood and cloth to pretend they were Deathworlders. Parents watched with mixed feelings, fear of change, but also pride that their children dreamed of strength. One evening, as the stars returned to the sky, Saralin visited the human leader at his camp. The humans had refused the palace halls, preferring their tents and fires on the edge of the city. She found him seated on a crate, studying a star map lit by a lantern. His armor was scratched, his face tired, but his eyes were steady. "You should rest," she told him gently. He shook his head. "There is no time. The Quran are only delayed. They will strike again, stronger." Saralin's gaze softened. "And yet, when they do, Illyria will not be the same. My people have learned from yours. We will not bow again." The human leader looked at her carefully, then gave a small smile. "Good. Because survival does not belong to those who wait for rescue. It belongs to those who fight for it." She nodded. "Then perhaps we have finally remembered what it means to live." The humans prepared to leave not long after. Their ships, though scarred, were repaired with Illyrian help. Supplies were loaded, tools packed, weapons cleaned. The people of Illyria gathered to watch, their hearts heavy. "Why do you go?" one child asked a human soldier, clutching at his sleeve. "Stay with us. Protect us forever." The soldier knelt and smiled. "We cannot stay. There are other cries for help across the stars. But you do not need us anymore. You are stronger now." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "But we are afraid." The soldier placed a hand on his shoulder. "Being afraid is not weakness. It only means you still value life. Remember what we taught you. Remember that you can fight. That is enough." The child nodded, holding those words close. When the day of departure came, the plazas filled again, not with music of welcome, but with songs of farewell. Illyrians lined the streets, bowing their heads as the humans marched to their ships. Farmers laid gifts of fruit and bread at their feet. Children waved garlands of flowers. Even the nobles, once so doubtful, stood in silence with respect. High Chancellor Siralin stepped forward as the human leader prepared to board his vessel. "On behalf of Illyria," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, "we thank you, not only for saving our world but for reminding us of strength we thought we had lost. You came as strangers, but you leave as kin. Know this. Wherever Earth walks among the stars, Illyria will stand with you." The human leader bowed his head. "We did what we had to, that is all." But Siralin smiled. "No, that is everything." The humans boarded their ships, engines roared, and the scarred vessels lifted into the skies. The crowd watched until they vanished into the stars, leaving only trails of fire behind. In the days that followed, Illyria changed. Their armies trained not for parades but for survival. Their farmers built stronger tools. Their children grew up learning both art and resilience. They did not abandon their beauty or their songs, but they wove into them the lessons of Earth, lessons of endurance, of courage, of refusing to yield. When the Quran returned months later, they found not the same fragile world, but a people ready to stand. Illyrian soldiers fought with new strength. Villagers defended their homes with clever traps. And always they carried in their hearts the memory of the Deathworlders who had come when no one else did. Generations later, Illyrian storytellers still spoke of that time. They told of the plea cast into the stars, of the scarred ships that descended instead of silver fleets, of the humans who fought like storms and taught Illyria to live again. And in those stories, one truth was always clear. They had asked for aid, but the stars had sent them Deathworlders, and that had made all the difference.